I wanted to go over some of the key terms to know as we discuss firms in the economy and the economic logic of firm behavior and individual behavior too. First off, let's think of costs and benefits. So in economics, we make a point of distinguishing between explicit costs and benefits and implicit costs and benefits. And explicit costs and benefits are what most people think about when they think about costs and benefits, at least in the economy. An explicit cost is one where a firm pays out money, sends money from its checking account into somebody else's checking account. We can see money change hands. We know that a cost was incurred. And likewise, a benefit, if we're talking about economic relationships, if you're a producer and you sell a bunch of stuff and you get a bunch of cash in return, that's explicit, and money changes hands. We have no trouble measuring those types of costs, and they're important. But the reason why we label them explicit costs is to differentiate them from implicit costs. And implicit costs are a little less intuitive. An implicit cost is a very real opportunity cost. So doing one thing very clearly meant not doing other things, but there's no money changing hands. So those kinds of costs can be fairly subtle. So the easiest one, or the most common one as we think about decision making, is say the foregone salary of somebody that leaves their job to start a business and then doesn't pay themselves a salary explicitly. They ought to, I think, pay themselves a salary explicitly, but oftentimes they don't. So the implicit cost would be something real, a cost you incurred, but that doesn't involve money changing hands. So if you left a job as an accountant and were making $100,000 a year to go start your own business, and you're just living off the residual, the difference between your revenues and your explicit costs, there would be a real opportunity cost of that foregone salary of $100,000. And if you're not thinking about that as you decide whether to go start a business, you're going to be making some dumb decisions. So we care about both explicit and implicit costs as people, and economists are the ones that we're called the dismal scientists, because we're the ones at the meeting saying, wait a second, there's an implicit cost that we have to think about. It's not that we shouldn't do anything, not that sometimes the benefits aren't greater than the costs, but you need to be counting up all benefits and all costs. And likewise, an implicit benefit is one where, I took a job on the West Coast at a much lower salary when I started my career because I wanted to be on the West Coast. I made a decision that being on the West Coast was worth, about $10,000 in salary to me. Well, that decision, that move to the West Coast cost me, $10,000 a year. That was I guess when I was comparing jobs, the salary was one thing, but then there were these implicit benefits. Where do I want to be? And the benefits of being out here were non-trivial. So that's an implicit benefit, and it should calculate. If you like running a coffee shop more than being an accountant, say, and you pay $20,000 a year for that happiness, or $100,000, whatever, then you should run the coffee shop. So implicit benefits can be important too. Just think about both as the point of this unit, both implicit and explicit costs and benefits. And then the reason why I started there is because that leads us right to the various forms of profit that come up in this process of thinking about firm behavior. We label as accounting profit just the obvious profit, and this is what newspapers report on, and it's just explicit total revenues minus explicit total costs. And labeling it accounting profit is somewhat silly, because accountants, obviously, if you're studying managerial accounting, you'll be thinking about both implicit and explicit costs and benefits. But most of what, say, the books you keep for the government would keep information on explicit revenues and explicit costs, and you wouldn't report an implicit benefit to pay tax on it. You just don't. You only count the flow of money. And so, accounting profit might be called naive profit, and it's profit calculation that only include explicit costs. And of course, economic profit would be implicit plus explicit benefits or revenues, minus, that would be all of those, minus implicit plus explicit costs. So for a firm, let's say a publicly traded firm, you'd think, okay, they're publicly traded, all information is out there, they'd be itemizing all costs explicitly, but that's not true. Actually, as we know, one of the huge implicit costs for a business is the need to, the costs incurred by investors in a business to hold stock in one firm means that you didn't hold stock in all the other firms whose stock you could have bought. So you've given up the rate of return available elsewhere in the economy to hold the stock of one firm, and that's an implicit cost. It's not itemized, but it's very important. And if you want to understand how investors move their money around, what Warren Buffett is doing, he's not thinking about accounting profit, he's thinking about economic profit. And if he's getting 7% of return on $1 billion worth of money, and he could get a 10% rate of return elsewhere, man, he's going to dump that 7% return asset and get that other asset. So a business knows this, that they have to return a normal rate of return to their shareholders if they want to keep those shareholders holding their stock. And if all your shareholders decide to dump your stock's going in the toilet, and the remaining investors are pretty upset. So anyway, there's some special rates of profit that we talk about, and normal rate of profit, normal rate of return. This is the situation where economic profit is equal to zero. And that's where firms are doing just as well, no better, but just as well as they would be doing elsewhere in the economy. And that means they're paying their investors a normal rate of profit or a normal rate of return. And that normal rate of return is a normal rate of accounting profit. And that gets us to the last concepts that are pretty important. I'll just change my color pen. Short run versus long run in a competitive industry. Just in a competitive industry, in an imperfectly competitive industry, which is most of what we see out there, some positive rate of economic profit might be sustained over time, might be. But in a competitive industry, there might be short run profit. So short run is defined as the period within which some factor is fixed. And it's possible in the short run to be earning a positive economic profit, to be doing better than you would be doing in any sector. That maybe you came up with a more efficient way to combine your inputs into an output, or maybe your particular variety, if you're in a pretty competitive sector, monopolistically competitive, you have a variety of a product, but there's a lot of other varieties. Maybe your product just catches consumer interest in a way other products don't. My sister-in-law, not my sister-in-law, my niece, I should say, is a jewelry designer, and she just came out with this line of 90s retro jewelry, and she got picked up in this magazine, and they're selling like hotcakes. And so there's that moment where you might come up with a better style that really is hot, and you're going to be doing really well. But What's going to happen? Well, you're going to pretty soon see that all the other jewelry makers are making 90s retro stuff, and boom, there goes your profit. So before the designs can change for other firms, you're making a profit, but when all factors are variable, that's what we call the long run. Other firms put resources into that profitable area, and in doing so, the supply of those types of products increases and your profits tend to be driven towards zero. So short run is the period in which some factor is fixed. Long run is the period within which all factors are variable. And what we've seen, and this is in particular in the chapter on long run movements in a competitive of resources among competitive industries, competitive firms among competitive industries, what we see is that in the short run, there might be supernormal profits, there might be losses in the short run, but in the long run, firms are going to leave losing sectors and enter the sectors that are gaining more than normal, and in that departure from losing sectors and entry into gaining sectors, profits are going to go up for the survivors in the losing sectors as the price goes up with the decreased supply as firms leave. But the area where entry is occurring, that price is going to be driven down, and with that falling price, those profits are going to be dissipating. So we see that the competitive economy is really good at attracting resources relatively quickly as possible, as quickly as all factors are variable. Factors are drawn to profitable sectors, and they're sucked away from losing sectors, and that's really what the market economy does really well. Get lots of stuff to areas that are valued highly relative to costs of production, and get resources away from sectors where products are valued low relative to their cost of production. That's when we talk about the market doing things well. That's what the market does well.